Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing great today, Tim. I hope everyone out there listening, I hope they're doing just as great. This conversation is one that we had been anticipating for quite a while after meeting our new friends at Light the Way Missing. It's one of their highlighted cases, and honestly one that I think you and I were both approaching with a lot of apprehension because it just seemed like this one was going to be a tough one, but our guest just made it so easy for us. It's still tough, but she made it really easy.
Yeah, today we're talking about the disappearance of Oakley Carlson from Oakville, Washington, and she was last seen on February 10th, 2021. And our guest today is Jamie Jo Hiles, who was Oakley Carlson's foster mom. And unfortunately, Oakley is now missing. And what you'll hear in this conversation is an explanation of how that happened and how Jamie Jo, but Oakley especially, was failed by the system.
I'm glad you used that word because it is a complete failure of the system. It's a disgrace of the system, to be honest. When the more you hear how the system treated Jamie Jo and her husband Eric after they were required to turn Oakley back over to her biological parents after raising her in a really loving environment for around 2 years.
And this is part one. Next episode, we will have Chief Paul Logan on the show, and he is with the Grays Harbor Sheriff's Office that's out there in Washington State. And there is currently a reward for information leading to Oakley Carlson's whereabouts, and that reward is up to almost $100,000 now. So if you have information, please call 360-533-8765.
All right, we're going to break real quick for a commercial, and we'll be right back with our conversation with Jamie Jo Hiles. Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. We were laughing a little bit about how maybe you might be a little bit not so savvy in the ways of computers. And we're like, don't sell yourself so short. So I think we achieved something off air. And I hope this conversation achieves something. It's going to be, Tim and I were talking about this earlier. We were trying to prep ourselves for just like how heavy this is going to be, how sort of sad this is going to be, to use, lack of a better word. So we do really appreciate you coming on to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for just continuing to get Oakley's name and her story out there. I'm really grateful for everybody that wants to continue sharing her story.
Can you tell us a little bit about you? Could you tell us your name and background?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jamie Jo Hiles, and I am from a little tiny one stoplight town in Washington State. I met my high school sweetheart at my high school, and we went to the same university together. And then we are both currently teachers. I teach at the school we went to, which is Elma High School, and he teaches down in Aberdeen. And he's my best friend. And our hobbies include watching movies and playing with our dogs, Pudge and Daisy.
All right, a lot to unpack there. What's the genre of movies that you two like to watch, and what breed of dogs are they?
Great questions. Okay, so we like to watch all movies. We actually have a scratch off movie poster in our pantry, and it's the 100 greatest movies of all time. And whenever we're like bored and we don't know what to do, we just go through the list of movies and we scratch them off as we watch them. And I think we've watched maybe like 25 movies, and some of them have been really good and some of them have been not good. And Pudge and Daisy are golden retrievers, and they are the light of my life. I love them so much. So you might hear them in the background. Also, we have them on the other side of the baby gate, but they're like little rambunctious guys. So like Pudge and Daisy, they're just so fun.
And what subject do you teach?
Oh, I am really lucky. I'm a career and technical education teacher, so I get to work with high school seniors, and I teach a class called iConnect. And so I teach the kids. So first semester is all about like trade schools, apprenticeships, military, applying to college. Today, I did the most enthralling presentation. I'm sure my seniors were just so excited, but I talked about student loans for like 25 minutes straight and like what's forbearance and what's deferment and how long is your grace period. And so that's a lot of the first quarter, and then second quarter is a lot of like, how do you do a job interview, and how do we do a resume, cover letter, and then second semester with those same kids is all about like, how do you get a good credit score? How do you like balance your checkbook? And then the last part of the year is like my personal favorite, because I go over like toxic and healthy relationships. And so we really go into like love languages and like, what does abuse look like? And then the kids, we learn about like child raising. And so they get to bring home the robot babies, which is really fun, because sometimes you have kids that are like, I want a baby right now. And then you give them a robot baby and they're like, shut it off. So I'm really grateful for what I get to teach, because I think every year I have a kid that comes back and is like, I learned so much in your class. And I'm like, thank you.
That's really, really awesome, because there are so many times in my life where I'm like, I wish I went to high school or any level of my education and had a class that taught me actual life things, like your credit score, like identifying a toxic relationship, like those things that just people in a generation, or maybe like half a generation before this generation, didn't have. Like,
no.
I mean, yeah, maybe I'll use some of the stuff that I was taught, maybe, but like,
maybe.
Why did we never learn about a credit score? But anyway, I don't want to go down that path. This is not that conversation that we should be having right now. But good for you, though. That's an amazing job.
Thank you. I asked my kids today, I always log on and I show them my information with like my student loans and how much I still owe. And then I'm like, when were you guys born? And they're like 2006. And I'm like, I've been paying on these since 2007. So if that doesn't hit home for anything, I hope it tells you how long I've been paying on my student loans. So be smart, people.
Wow, that's incredible. That is a really good perspective to put it in too. I've been paying my student loans since you were 1 years old.
Yeah, that's depressing, but
yeah, God, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, useful stuff though. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so how did you get into foster parenting?
Great question. So my husband and I have battled infertility for years and years. We currently right now are doing in vitro fertilization. But when we became parents of Oakley, she literally landed in our lap. It was like, how did this happen? I had a former student that messaged me and was like, hey, my hairdresser's granddaughter needs a foster parent. And I know that you and Eric want to be parents. Are you willing to take in this little baby? And Eric and I were like, sure. Like, it was so weird. I remember exactly where we were on the couch and it was like, yeah, like this just feels right. And so we like thought about it and we met Oakley and we were like, yeah, like this is good. Like, let's do it. And so I wasn't even a foster parent when we got Oakley. We had to become foster parents as we had Oakley in our care.
Well, everyone that we've spoken to in regards to Oakley's story and the situation that she came from and the situation she went back to in between is you and your husband, and everyone we've spoken to cannot say like enough great things, like wonderful things about you and your husband and the time that Oakley spent with the two of you. So it's like a little bit intimidating even to like have this conversation with you, because like just knowing like probably the best time she ever had in her life was with the two of you.
I hope when I think about Oakley, I hope that that's what she thought about during dark times. And I know that that's kind of a bleaker, morbid thing to think about, but I hope that in anything, in any situation, I hope that she was comforted knowing that there were people that loved her.
Absolutely. And what did you know about her living situation when you were introduced to her?
Not a lot, actually. I feel like that is one of the downsides of foster care, is that unfortunately you're kind of in the dark on things. So I would say probably until like the first few months, I didn't know a lot except for the general like assumption of drug use, neglect. And so no details were given, just this baby needs a place and you can watch her, but we need you to do all these classes to be able to watch her.
Okay, so that's interesting. You said you weren't foster parents at the time that you were introduced to her. So what's the process like there? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so what it meant for us is like you have to do several things. We had to go to these classes down in Aberdeen, which is about a 30-minute drive from where we live. So we had to go to classes since only one of the parents has to be like a registered foster parent. I was the one that did the classes because my husband worked nights a lot of the time. And so I would go and I would take these like 2 or 3 hour classes. Both of us had to become like first aid CPR certified. And then when we were like officially licensed foster parents, it meant we had to do like a meeting with somebody from DCYF where he would come to our house and he like walked around our house to make sure that everything was like safe, that our medication was in a lockbox, that we had like a ladder underneath our bed from our second story, that we had like an escape route in case there was an emergency. Like we had 2 months of food supply and water supply, like all these different things that you have to do in order to be a foster parent. And so after we had Oakley in our care, slowly we started to kind of like check those things off.
How old was Oakley when you met her?
She was 8 months old. So she just, when she went into foster care, she was 7 months old. And then when she came to us, she was 8 months. And the reason that that's kind of like a weird blend of time is when we were asked if we could take Oakley, my husband and I were like, yeah, like we want to take her, but it's our anniversary tomorrow and we're flying out for Las Vegas. And so we were, yes, we want to take this little girl, but we're flying out to Vegas for like 4 or 5 days to celebrate our anniversary. And so somebody else took Oakley for about 2 weeks. And by that time that we got her, she was 8 months old. So we first met her at like right at the tail end of like 7 months. And then she was 8 months when she officially came into our care.
And what was it like when you met her for the first time and the person brought her to you and your husband?
2 funny things come to mind. So I am the youngest child in my family and my husband is the youngest in his family. And we are not used to being around kids. Like, you know, we both teach high school. And so I'm petrified of this little girl because she's licking everything and she's touching everything and she's trying to learn how to walk and she's crawling. And I'm so afraid that she's going to put something in her mouth. And so finally the gal that was with me was like, she's not going to break. Like, cause I think I was watching with like, oh no, don't do that. Oh no, like don't lick the water bowl, like for the dogs, like no. And the lady had to tell me like, she's okay. Like she can touch things. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I think I'm just nervous. That same woman, when Oakley was in our care, Oakley was a big baby. I thought that she would be wearing like 9-month-old clothing because she was 8 months old, but she was in 18, 24-month clothing as a baby. And I had no idea how to install a car seat. My husband's working a night shift. And so this woman comes over and she asked me to hold Oakley while she would install a car seat. The woman was taking a while to install the car seat and find the hooks. And I'm holding Oakley and my arms are just shaking because she's so heavy. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like I'm getting a workout in holding this little baby. And so I would say that my arms were in shape that first year that we had Oakley. So that was, I think, definitely an adjustment, but she was such a good baby. Like you wouldn't know that we were strangers to her.
And tell us about her personality.
It's so hard to answer this question because it sounds like I'm just really cliche when I say that she was just happy all the time, but she was genuinely like so smart. Like she knew baby sign language. She was speaking almost full sentences by the time she was like 2 years old. She would try anything. There are foods that I still won't try as an adult and Oakley would try. I'm like, I'm so picky. Cheese pizza is my favorite. And Oakley loved any kind of pizza. And she would try anything. And I'm so grateful. There were so many times where Eric and I would look at each other and we would just think like, how did we get such a good baby? Like, how are we so lucky? Like she would sleep every single night. She would sleep the whole night through. She would sleep in. Like I have friends that are like, oh, my kid wakes me up at 5 or 6 in the morning, and Oakley would sleep until like 8 o'clock, take a 2 or 3 hour nap during the day, go to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Like we were just so lucky. So she'd eat well, she'd sleep well. And then she was just nice. Like Oakley knew how to say sorry. She said, please and thank you. Like we just hit jackpot with her because she was just so well behaved. And did she have her moments? Yes, absolutely. Like any kid has their moments, but we would correct that behavior of like, no, we don't hit in this household, or like, no, we're not going to bite. Like, that's not nice. And she learned really quickly, like, oh, okay. Like I won't get away with that. And that was that. Like she was excellent.
You are a very positive and motivated and upbeat person, and
Thank you.
you tell these stories about Oakley in such a great way. I'm just wondering, like, how do you compartmentalize the reality that happened after she was with you?
I feel like my husband and I kind of were grieving a solid like year and a half before anybody else was, if that makes sense. So when Oakley left us in November of 2019, like we were heartbroken. Like we shut that door and we just like ugly cried. Like the kind of cry that like you never want to hear a parent cry. And we shut her bedroom door and we didn't go in there for until COVID, actually. So she left in November of 2019 and we didn't go in that room until probably like June or July of 2020 because it was just too painful to even look in her bedroom. And so, I feel like we had a really long time to grieve the situation, but I think that I compartmentalize a lot because I'm not normally a sad person. But I think that either I have had a lot of time to process the loss or it just hasn't hit me yet. I'm not quite sure yet which one.
Tell us about the system, I guess, that like how was she taken away from you after she was living with you?
Right. So that's an excellent question. I will never know the why to that. But so Oakley came to us in September of 2017 and she left us in November of 2019, days before her third birthday. It was about the summer of 2019 that my husband and I kind of started to feel like a turn with things. Like I would say in the spring of 2019, we found out that Jordan, Oakley's mother, was going to be having another baby. And Eric and I were asked if we would be interested in taking that one once it was born. And we were like, yes, we would take that little sibling. And then we brought it up again at the next, because every month DCYF has monthly visits to make sure that the child is doing all right in your care. And so like the next month we brought it up and we're like, okay, so like is a baby going to be coming to us? Because we kind of like to like prepare, because we have a 4-bedroom house, but we have 2 bedrooms that we could use for like Oakley and a little sibling. We kind of want to make sure we're getting like a nursery prepared. And we were told, oh, well, we can't answer that kind of stuff. Like, we can't answer those questions about somebody else's like healthcare. And I was like, that's really weird, because you asked me last month if we would want this baby. I would say definitely the summertime we were like told, hey, there's a good chance that like Oakley is going to go back. And we thought that was just crazy. And the reason behind that is when Oakley and her siblings first entered foster care in 2017, one of the social workers was supposed to say something on the stand at like a court hearing, but she failed to do that. And so Jordan fought that in court, and it went from the Grace Harbor court to like the Tacoma like Superior Court. And Jordan ended up winning that. And so it basically reset the clock for the dependency, so that the kids were basically brand new to foster care. Even though we'd had Oakley for like, 500 something days, it was as if Oakley and her siblings had just entered foster care as brand new kids. And because Jordan was clean, because she was pregnant, it made it so that they were eligible to receive their kids back. And so we, meaning my husband and I, knew that was not right. We went to the court hearings. We wrote letters to the courts. We wrote letters to the judges. We did everything we could to be like, this isn't right. And you're going to harm this child. But it just fell on deaf ears, unfortunately.
And they claim they wanted Oakley back?
Yes, they wanted Oakley and it was very much a I want to win mentality.
Did you ever have any interaction with them?
So I actually went to high school with Oakley's dad, Andrew. He was a junior when I was a freshman, but we never spoke. Like we were never in the same circle. So like I knew him from going to the same high school, which our high school is very small. I think at the time that I was in school, we were probably close to like 700 something kids in the building, but never had an interaction with him. So the one time I did talk to him when Oakley was in our care, I had to pick Oakley up from a visit that he was having so I could go take her to dance class. And he was so kind. He was like, thank you. Like, thank you for taking such good care of her. He shook my hand. Jordan, the mom, was not there. This is when they were like separated because they would have off and on relationship problems. And that was my only experience with the dad. The mom I saw at court hearings, and she would just give me nasty looks, which I'm like, that's fine. Like, if you don't like me, that's fine. But I'm doing an excellent job of taking care of your child that you couldn't take care of. So
it's so frustrating to hear this story. I can't even imagine experiencing it and living it firsthand. Just the hypocrisy of a system that will say that they care about a child and this is why they're doing it. And then some weird thing happens where someone doesn't say something and it resets it, and it's like all of a sudden this child isn't a human anymore. It's just a name on a paper that gets reset, and now we just got to do it. Like, how is it? How does no one see the nuance in every single situation that she did not have to go back? There was no cause for that.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times that. I mean, I think I wrote the judge 3 or 4 letters. I had letters that people wrote for me on behalf of like my husband and myself to say like, no, like Oakley's like best like situation would be to stay with us. And the social worker was like, those are not necessary. Like, those are not necessary. And so like, I still have them. I still have a file of all the letters that people wrote. And one of the letters that stands out is a woman I work with. She's the nurse and she used to do a lot of stuff with DCYF. And she was like, please don't make Oakley a statistic. Please don't make Oakley a statistic of return home and then back in foster care, 6 months later. And I just remember reading that and being like, I hope that's not the case. Like, I hope that it would never happen. But Oakley was very much a statistic of, look, we made it work. We returned home from foster care. Go us. And that makes me sick because what trauma did they now have from being that statistic? What really sucked, I'll never forget this, is after, like, this must have been the week after Oakley returned to her biological parents. So every year I always go get my flu shot because I work with kids. And this year I'd been too busy, right? Like I just hadn't gotten my flu shot yet. And when you get your shots, you also have to send them to DCYF to show them like, look, I'm vaccinated, like I'm all caught up. So I'm not going to get the foster kids sick. So this woman calls me from DCYF and she's like, you haven't gotten your you haven't gotten your flu shot yet. And I was like, yeah, I know I need to do it. And she goes, okay, well, you need to do that or you might have your foster child removed from your home. And I just was like, she actually just returned home, like, last week to her biological parents. And the lady was like, oh, okay. She goes, well, in about 6 months, she'll probably be back to you. And she just said it so nonchalantly of like, well, she'll probably be back in 6 months. And I just thought, what? Like, so my child has to be taken from me, which is already traumatic enough, knowing that like we're the mom and dad that rocked her to sleep for like 2.5 years and like loved on her and like made her like so confident and intelligent that we just like showered her with every bit of love that we could give her. And then to be yanked from us, put into an unfamiliar place, traumatized, and then be given back to us in 6 months. What for? What is that for? Why would we do that to kids?
Why would she ever tell you that? So you can have that thought in your head. Because now you're thinking all like that's just a new layer of trauma for you and your husband.
Right.
But it's a system that should be helping the kids.
Yeah.
But it's not, and that's just so disheartening.
Yeah. And so we closed our foster license for all other children except for Oakley. So the only kid we wanted was Oakley. And we thought she'll be back in 6 months. And then at the end of that 2 years of my foster license being valid, I got a call from DCYF and they're like, do you want to keep this open? And I was like, no. Oakley's not back to me yet. Like, I'll go ahead and let it expire. Like, she's not coming back. So,
And they said she'd be back to you in 6 months, just assuming something would go wrong with the birth parents. Is that what they meant?
yeah. Yeah. I think they think that, unfortunately, when parents use drugs, that give it 6 months and they'll be back. And this woman didn't know who Oakley was. She didn't know their story. I think she just had to call parents and say, foster parents, and say, hey, get your flu shot, get your vaccines done. And so she was just speaking blindly, not knowing anything or anything about me. But it's like, wow, like the fact that you would say that is just, you're, yeah.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. So it must be a common enough occurrence that the kids keep bouncing back and forth that it's kind of just assumed that that's going to keep happening. Is there a better way to do that? Like, doesn't that seem like that's not necessarily in the best interest of the kid?
I mean, in my mind, there's so many things that could be done better. I am so heartbroken that we have this foster care system set up to save children, but they will do anything and everything they can for the biological parents and not for the children. I think that they have that so backwards. You know, we tried to run a bill in Oakley's name this year, and it died on the floor. It didn't even make it to the voting session. And part of that bill was to make sure and test parents that have drug use history, you know, to make sure that they're being tested. Because like in foster care, they're only observed for 6 months. So they're only checked up on for 6 months. Well, after that 6 months is up, the court, the judge signs off on it, and then they don't have to check in on them anymore. Well, that's typically when parents start using again. I can't believe that we live in a society where we wouldn't do our due diligence in making sure that children are safe, or that we would return them to any situation where they could be put back in harm's way and feel that that's an acceptable situation.
I really give you a lot of credit for not like losing your mind with having this conversation, because we have a system that will check in on minor criminals, adults who have been released from prison. They will check in on them monthly, weekly, whatever it takes, for years. Some people might get checked in on for the rest of their lives. They can't leave the state without checking in and saying, it's cool for me to leave the state. And the hypocrisy of a system that is always talking about wanting to do the best for the children and the future. And they don't check it. A bill dies on the floor that simply requires the same thing they're doing with criminals, convicted people who are released into society, and they won't do it for children who are put back into a situation that they know is toxic, that test them every month, every 3 weeks. Like, you can do this. This isn't a huge expense. Like, why did it die on the floor?
We were told it would cost too much money because, well, yeah. So we were told that they would have to hire more social workers that would be then do it, right?
Like, right. That's the question. That's the solution. Then do it.
Yeah. So in the Oakley's law, the thing that's unfortunate is, you know, people read it and they freaked out and they were like, oh my God, like this is so extreme. Well, we can edit it. Like things can be changed. Like just because this is the first version you see of it doesn't mean that like we can't change things. So our first version of Oakley's law was that we would have those that have had previous drug offenses and addiction, they would need to be checked in on for 5 years with a drug test. And 5 years, I think, is very like extreme to some people. But like, I mean, when I look at Oakley's biological parents, like they've been using for longer than 5 years. And I think, unfortunately, that is what shot some things down, and also that the cost. And what hurts my heart is that Representative Tana Sin, who sat at the chair and was the one that could have made it go to a vote, was the one that was like, this isn't being voted on today. And she says that she's for like advocacy for children and children safety, and she didn't even let it get that far. And I'm disturbed and I'm heartbroken that like I have to constantly be like, hey guys, like this isn't right. Like this isn't ethical. And people are kind of like not making eye contact with me, right? Like they're kind of like when I call on somebody in class and they're thinking, okay, maybe if I don't like look at her, she won't like acknowledge me. But that's how I feel with the government right now. And I never want to make things political. I hate being confrontational, but at this point, it's just one of those things where I feel like I'm constantly like, hey, like, you know that this isn't right. Why are you letting people get away with this? And they're just kind of like, not my thing. Sorry.
It's really like inexplicable, the cost. Like, okay, so apparently there is a number you can apply to the well-being of the children in this country. There's an actual dollar figure.
Yeah. And when I sat there and I testified, I said, like, my daughter was starved to death. She was beaten and she was locked in a cabinet. And you can sit here and justify saying that like it's expensive to have people go check on that. Like that's unacceptable to me. That is completely unacceptable. And I hope you have a hard time sleeping at night knowing that that's what you support, because that's not okay.
Yeah, there's costs associated when a child goes missing too. I mean, it's just seems so much better to be preemptive in this situation.
That's a great point. So where are you applying those dollars, right? Is it to after the fact or maybe apply them to the preemptive like prevention?
Yeah, right? I mean, like that seems like a no-brainer, but like and then like the comeback to me a lot of the time is, oh, well, we're implementing services for parents that are struggling. And I'm like, well, Jordan and Andrew were offered services too. And you know what? They declined them. They said, no, thanks, shut the door. Did that help Oakley? No. What would have helped Oakley is if a social worker went in and checked for bruises when I called and complained saying, I think this child is being abused. Or if a social worker followed up on it a month later and was like, surprise visit, where's Oakley? Where are her siblings? We need to check for like bruises and make sure that there's no drug usage in the house. Like that's what that money should go towards, not for like other things.
So that happened, that Oakley went to visit her birth mom or dad and came back with bruises?
No. So Oakley, so in October 2019, Oakley went to a visit. It was like a 2-day visit. No, I think that this one wasn't an overnight one yet. She went there for a long, like a full day and came back. And Oakley said that she saw her mom hitting her dad. And I got the whole thing on camera and I was like, hey, like this is really worrisome to me because we knew that domestic violence was in their past, right? I sent it to the social worker and the social worker was like, like 2-year-olds say things, like 2-year-olds say things. And Oakley really loves her mom and her dad. And like, it's fine. Like, it's kind of like, just brush it under the rug. Like, it's not a big thing. It's, 2-year-olds make stuff up, which I'm thinking like, I have never laid a hand on Eric and Eric has never laid a hand on me. And I don't think that she's just making this up because that's not any kind of behavior she would see in my house. So where is she seeing this behavior at? Because it's not my place. I'm not letting her watch TV where people hit people. Like that's not something that happened. So when Oakley went back to her parents permanently, I always had this fear in the back of my mind of like, is she going to get hurt by them? So in December of 2020, Oakley went to her biological grandparents' house for Christmas, and the grandma took a picture of Oakley, and I saw this picture of Oakley, and she looked very bad. She was gaunt. Her eyes looked kind of sunken, almost like she had a black eye. It wasn't the little girl that I said goodbye to, right? Like my little happy girl, my little like chunky happy girl. And so I waited. I thought maybe the grandma will call CPS and make a report. I waited for just anybody to call and make a report, and nobody made a report. So then I contacted the police chief, which she is constantly at our high school because she does like guest speaking at the school on forensic stuff. And so I spoke to her and I said, hey, like, I'm really worried about Oakley, but I'm afraid if I call it in, I'm going to be seen as like a disgruntled foster parent and I won't be taken seriously. And the police chief was like, no, Jamie Jo, you need to call. And I asked the police chief first if she could go do a welfare check. And she said, I can't, it's out of my city. So like, I can't. And I was like, okay, I understand. And I respect that. And she said, but you are a mandated reporter since you're a teacher. So like you need to call CPS. So I was like, okay. So I called CPS and I said, I'm really worried about my former foster daughter. She looked sickly in this picture, just gaunt, like she possibly had a black eye. And the first thing that I'm like told is that like, did you see this firsthand? And I was like, no, sir, I did not. And they're like, okay, well, who saw it? And I was like, well, a family friend showed me the picture who got it from the grandma. And they're like, okay, well, why isn't the grandma calling in? And I'm like, sir, I don't know. But I'm just really worried about the little girl. And he was like, well, you can get in big trouble if you're making like false reports. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I knew that this was going to happen. Like, I knew that this was going to happen. And I'm like, please just like, can somebody go out and check? You know, again, it's kind of like well, like you're hearing it from somebody who's hearing it from somebody, you know, like we have to make sure that like what we're doing is like valid. And I'm like, I understand, but like, please just go check. And I never heard anything. And that was it. And then March of 2021 rolled around and I got a call from DCYF and they're like, hey, have you seen Oakley Carlson? And I was like, no. And they're like, okay, well, have you seen her siblings? And I was like, no. And I'm like, I don't have any contact with Oakley after she left. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and close the like case that you called in, you know, 2 months ago. And then that was it.
There should be no questioning that call. If
No.
they can identify who you are and you're legitimately calling as the former foster parent and extremely concerned based on pictures, there shouldn't be any fear of repercussion if it's not accurate. I mean, what in the world would the family do if someone showed up and said, we're just doing a check? I mean, there's no, like, is there a lawsuit that's possible? Like, why is there just a fear of this repercussion getting in the way of a legitimate call? Like,
well, that's when they went out to Jordan and Andrew's place and they were like, hey, like, you know, we have services that we can help you with things. And Jordan and Andrew literally were like, no, thanks. And then they shut the door. They shut the door in DC West. And then that was the end of it. There was no follow-up after that. It was like, oh, hey, you don't want these services? Okay, I guess we close the case now. It's like, to me, that would have been like, oh, they're like for sure hiding something. Like we need to like see those children and double check on those kids. But it was like oh, they're like disgruntled or happy or unhappy that we're here. I guess we need to leave. It's like, that's acceptable to you? What?
And so how long had she been away from you when that happened?
At Christmas of 2020, that was like about a year and a month. And then I called in late January. So I saw the picture probably in like maybe early January of Oakley. And I waited like maybe a week or 2 weeks. And then I was like, hey, is anybody going to call? And everybody was like, no, we're not going to call. And I was like, okay, I'll call and file with CPS. And then March, they're like, we're going to close it. And then November of 2021 is when I saw the fire. And somebody shared the GoFundMe with me. And immediately I knew something was wrong. Like I was like, oh my God, like they blamed this fire on their 4-year-old daughter, which would have been Oakley. And they said that she touched a lighter while they were sleeping and it caught the couch on fire. And I just immediately knew that this was not accurate. And so I wrote an email to Oakley's old social worker and I said, hey, this is not right. Something is wrong. And I have tried to warn you guys several times now that things are going on in that house that are not right. I'm worried that if this house did catch fire and burn certain parts of the house, why are they still living in it? That sounds structurally unsound. It's November, so you know it's raining a ton out here in Washington. So are they living in a house with like toxic fumes or is it moldy? Like what is that living situation like? And then secondly, like I can barely use a lighter as like a 36-year-old woman. It's hard for me to get a lighter to go or even like the long butane. I can't do that. It's hard for me to do sometimes. I'm like a 4-year-old would have to have such good finger strength and dexterity to get that. And you're telling me that she did that? Absolutely no chance. Absolutely not. So I was ignored. I then called CPS and I put in a report saying, hey, there's this fire. I think something's going on, and they screen out my call. So I have 2 other friends that I'm like, please call CPS and make a report about this because something is not right. And they like vetted their calls also.
What do you mean by screened out your call and vetted the calls?
They just thought she's just an angry foster parent that wants her daughter back, and she's making this up.
What? Why does everyone else not have a brain in their heads in this story? Like even if Oakley figured out how to use a lighter, any type of lighter, and hold it to a couch in the time it takes to like engulf a couch or like bring the couch to full flame, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like even if she figured that out, why did she do that?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there's obviously a problem here.
Something's wrong. Something's amiss, whether it's anger issues on Oakley's side or the fact that the parents, this is the thing that will kill you though, is that like looking at the GoFundMe photos, at the bottom of the couch, there is a literal crack pipe at the bottom of the couch. So like, I'm begging, please go check on these kids. And they're like, she's a mad foster parent who's just mad that she lost her foster daughter. We're just going to ignore that.
Did you point out the crack pipe in the picture?
I didn't see the crack pipe. I screenshot the GoFundMes and I put it in my email to the social worker, which that's how I know she actually accessed the like photos, is because, you know, in Google, like sometimes if you don't have permission from somebody to view photos, it will like, you'll have to send an email asking for permission to see them. I got the email asking for permission to see the photos. So I know that her social worker got that email and then asked for permission to see the photos. But I didn't see the crack pipe until I think it was after we noticed that Oakley was missing, because somebody on YouTube had zoomed in to the crack pipe.
Good on them for zooming into the crack pipe, because I mean, you and your husband have so many other things going on, and like you're not going to play detective and try to.
It's just a joke at this point. Like when I tell the story, I'm just like, it sounds so made up. It's just how our state DCYF system is unfortunately, it's just such a failure. It sounds like a joke.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound like a joke, but it's not. And it's a glaring representation of how lazy and bureaucratic the system is, and hypocritical. Everyone like talks about change and all that, but like no one really. If this isn't what makes people in those positions change, nothing will.
Right. But they won't. And again, that's where the accountability of like, I don't want to make eye contact with her because she, you know, I'm expecting change, and I think it's too much work for them to change.
It's just too much of a systemic overhaul to change their process. You're afraid?
To take accountability means that they have to agree to a mistake, and they don't want to agree that there were mistakes made. In fact, even though we have asked our governor for a secondary review into Oakley's case, because the first one they did with an ombudsman, which is supposed to be like an impartial, you know, investigation into Oakley's case, they said there was nothing done wrong with Oakley's case, and we know that that's not the truth. So we've asked for a second one, and Governor Inslee just keeps denying that, saying, no, I have faith in the investigation that was done the first time by our ombuds office, which is kind of like, dude, like, you know that things were not done correctly. And so I think in order for anybody to say like, yeah, like we definitely messed up, I think that means that they're going to have to like take some ownership, and it could be costly for them, because I'm not going to stop, but they're also going to completely ignore me. Because Governor Inslee's never once talked to me or addressed me, and it's just easier for him to ignore me than it is to take any ownership.
I'm struggling to understand if this was more of like a interpersonal issue with a few people there, or if it's the entity.
I think it's all of the above. What we have been told is that the social worker, Angela Fries, she was pretty friendly, and I don't think they would hang out, but her and Jordan, Oakley's mom, were good friends. And so I think that when I would say, hey, I'm worried about Oakley saying that she's seeing hitting happening on her visits, or I'm worried about this, I think it was easier for the social worker to be like, we're just gonna ignore that. Like, we're just gonna ignore that. Like, I'm not gonna like postpone this mom getting her biological children back. Like, we need to just get them back. And then when I would call and be like, hey, like something's not right, like we need to like check in on them again, the social worker would get notified and then be like, I'm just going to go ahead and like not address this situation.
Is this person still a social worker?
Yeah, she actually got a raise after Oakley went back.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yep.
How does it keep getting worse and worse?
I know. Okay. So she was promoted shortly after Oakley and her siblings case closed in June of 2020. She was promoted. And get this, about the time that it must have been like December, January of 2021, 2022. So we know that Oakley's missing, right? I made a post on Facebook about how the social worker should feel responsible, and she liked my comments. So she was definitely like stalking my comments on social media and going through and liking them. I wrote DCYF and I said, this is completely inappropriate. I'm feeling harassed by the social worker. And they just said, okay. Like, that was pretty much all. We've received your complaint, and that was it. But yeah, she still works for them.
I'm so confused. Like, I'm so confused. They closed a case on this child. After they closed the case on her, she still hasn't been found. Can you just tell the listeners what the parents are doing right now?
Yeah. So the dad is living his best life out in Wenatchee, Washington. He is scot-free. He served about a year in jail here in our local Grays Harbor County jail for child endangerment. And that is because for Oakley's siblings, they had such high levels of methamphetamine in their system that he was charged with a Class B felony. And so he served a whole year for that. Oakley's mom is currently in prison up in Purdy, and she will probably be out in like, I'm going to say a year. And that is on 2 counts of identity theft and 2 others technically. But she took a plea deal and got like a crazy good deal. So no charges have been brought forward for Oakley. So when Jordan gets out, I don't know what's going to happen.
And where's Oakley?
Great question.
The person who's responsible for closing this or worked in the system got a promotion and a raise.
Yeah. I have to also tell you that like the day that my husband and I got the call, I will never forget this. So December 2021, Oakley's 5th birthday, we get a call from DCOF, and it is Oakley's old social worker. And she's like, hey, can you take Oakley's little brother and Oakley when we find her? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So we're thinking that Oakley's coming to us that night. We have no idea that she's missing to the extent that she is missing, right? Like, we think that she's going to be in our house that night. I'm panicking because it's her birthday. I need to plan like a party for her. I have to clean my rooms or my bedrooms for like a 2-year-old. And also Oakley, who she's going to have to sleep in a queen bed. And, I also have a dance team banquet that night because I coached the dance team at my high school. So I'm thinking like, oh, I have so many things to do, but I'm so excited that I'm going to have my little girl again. Right. So we get Oakley's little brother. He's dropped off in a Monsters Inc. onesie and rubber boots, nothing else. And he is dirty as all get out. Okay. Like, he's like dirty. And then we wait for Oakley and and it's like 1, 2 in the morning. And I just am like sleeping, looking at my phone, like, please call. Like, I'm never told, oh, like, we think she's dead. Like, I'm thinking she's going to be dropped off at my house soon. The next morning, my husband and I go to Target with her little brother, and we get him some clothes and some toys. And the whole time I'm just like, my phone is like in my hand, just thinking, soon, like, I'm going to see Oakley soon. And I text the social worker and I say, hey, I have a toddler bed for her little brother, but do you think that a queen size bed is okay for Oakley? And the social worker texts me back and says, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. doesn't even tell me, doesn't even have the nerve to say, we are currently digging in the earth for her remains, but just says, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I'm still under the impression that I'm getting Oakley back. We're in Target. We're buying all these clothes for her little brother. I'm in the toy aisle and my friend calls me, and my friend watches Grace Harbor County Court on YouTube all the time because it was still during the COVID times where you could watch court hearings on YouTube. And she says, hey, did you know that Jordan and Andrew are in court right now for manslaughter? And I'm thinking, oh my God, they killed somebody. They killed somebody. That's why they're hiding their kids. And then she's like, no, it's for the manslaughter of Oakley. And I was like, what? Like, I mean, if time could have stopped, like, that's one of those like situations where like I just sit there like, for Oakley? Like, no, like that's not real. And then I go outside, immediately throw up, tell my husband, they think that Jordan and Andrew killed Oakley, and he's just silent, and her little brother is freaking out in the backseat of the car, and we're just like, what do we do? And so I text the detective and I said, hey, like, is it true that like right now they're doing like searches and that like they're being held on manslaughter for Oakley? And they were like, and he said, yeah, unfortunately. So as of now, I have never been told by Oakley's social worker that Oakley is missing to the extent that she is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That is heartbreaking.
We've talked to so many people just doing this show, and I can't think of another story like that. Like, this is, I mean, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Where are you at now? Like, how are you and your husband doing, and what's the next steps?
We're good. He actually just walked by. You can call on. You're just gonna wave.
Oh, hey.
They say hi. So he's my best friend. And I think that we have gotten stronger as a couple because of this. When people like talk to us about things like the other day I was at a home football game, right? Like, and I go to all the sporting events for my students, and I see this person, and his mom was with him, and his mom's elderly. So this man's probably in his 40s or 50s. And the mom goes, oh, that's Oakley Carlson's mom. And the man turned to me and goes, yeah, I bet you Oakley's up in heaven. And like, unfortunately, we have a lot of people that make really like random and out of pocket comments to us. And I will never be rude, but I just kind of was like, oh, okay. Like, thank you for that. But I can go to my husband and be like, oh my God. Like, I don't know what to say back at that point. We've had people stop us in Costco or at the mall and like hug us, which I will always hug somebody. But sometimes I don't know what to say back to somebody. But I'm grateful that Eric is there to kind of also be there with me and be like, we're experiencing this together. It's not just you. It's not just him. It's like we're together. And we will always advocate for our girl, Oakley. We are close to $100,000 in a reward fund for her. And we just booked a trip to Disneyland on her birthday because I don't want to be here when it's her birthday / the 2-year anniversary of finding out that she's missing. So we're going to go to Disneyland for 2 whole days. And we just do the best we can as far as like keeping her name out there.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. Spending the day at Disneyland is a great place to, I would say. It's the happiest place on earth. You can't be sad
Right.
there.
Yeah, right. That's what I thought too. I was like, and we asked every year if we could take Oakley to Disneyland because we love Disney. And so we asked every year, can we please take her to Disneyland? And unfortunately, her biological parents declined that every year. And so we thought this would be the best way to celebrate Oakley is by being in the place that we couldn't take her. So.
Yeah. And great job. I mean, not great job, but it's so great to see a couple like you and Eric come together and have this moment make you stronger.
Thank you.
You know, because we just hear so many stories about families not knowing how to deal with it, not knowing how to proceed, and just getting so caught up in the anger and the grief, and rightfully so. Like, really, there's no there's no problem with being angry and losing it from time to time and just letting that go. But to make it be, to have that make your bond stronger is so great.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm really grateful too, because like I said earlier, I think that we grieved together years ago when she left. And then obviously this was just like opening a whole new wound, but it was a familiar feeling wound of that, like, I'm longing for her and I would do anything for her, but she's not there. And so that's how it felt, 2 years ago when we had to load her into that car, and I was so uncertain as to, like, will she be safe? Will she be loved? And that's how I feel now, is that, like, I would do anything to hold her right now, or to, like, when I think of her friends that are first graders and they had their back to school pictures, and I'm like, oh, she should be there. Or, like, trick or treating, like, I burst into tears thinking about, like, what she would be dressed as. Or, like, the other day we got the Amazon catalog of, like, what all the kids want for Christmas this year, and I just, like, and I don't cry very often, but, like, I would, like, cry looking at it thinking, like, what would I spoil her with this year? But to have Eric there and, like, pat me on the shoulder and be like, I understand, that you're sad, and I understand that you're feeling this way, because nobody else really gets that. But sometimes he'll just be with me while I'm, like, having these feelings, and to know that I'm not alone in that is a really good feeling.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. And are Oakley's siblings safe? Are they okay?
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of questions that we get is like, okay, well, do you still have Oakley's sibling? Well, no. When we found out that Oakley was, like, not going to be found, we were like, we cannot continue to, like, have this little boy, because, like, we are grieving and he needs us so badly, but we can't be the parents that he, like, needs. And we didn't know it at the time, but he was really a hard child to have for, like, 48 hours, and which made me question, like, am I this out of touch with parenting that I don't know how to console a child that is, like, screaming and crying and climbing on everything? Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But we didn't know this, but, like, they did a hair follicle test, and his methamphetamine levels in his blood and in his body were so high on the charts that, like, the test couldn't read it. Like, it was higher than what the range has on the test. It's like, that's what an adult does with methamphetamine, not a 2-year-old child. Which that makes a lot of sense now, because I look back on that time and I was like, why am I struggling so much with him? But I didn't know it was, like, withdrawals.
Wow, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
Is there a moment with Oakley that stands out to you?
Yeah, I have a lot.
I bet.
So I'll tell you a couple of them if you would like to hear them. I will never forget. She did dance, which was a lovely thing, because my dance coach, when I was in high school, she owned the dance studio, and typically you don't get to start dance until you're, like, 3 years old. Oakley was 2, and I was like, can we please put her in dance? Because I want to see her dance. I don't know if we'll get to have her when she's 3 or 4 years old. So can we please put her in dance? And my coach was like, yeah, absolutely. If she has a hard time, we'll know to, like, pull her and try it again later. But we'll go ahead and put her in at 2 years old. And Oakley did dance every Tuesday, and she was phenomenal. That first year at the recital was in June of 2019, and my husband and I are sitting in the audience, and her show was the first one to go on, because, like, the littlest kids always go first at dance recitals, and we could hear a little girl crying, but we didn't know if it was Oakley or not. And the curtain opens, and Oakley's just standing there front and center with her little hands on her hips, just ready to go. Like, and she was phenomenal. And at the end, I have the DVD. It's my favorite DVD. She, like, takes a bow. And I'm just like, oh, just so freaking cute. So in August, they did this same routine at the Grays Harbor County Fair. and they do it on a little stage where they can do it in front of all the people at the fair. And she was like the little ringleader. Like she was like grabbing the hands of her people in her group and telling them like where to go and what to do. And I'm pretty sure that both times that my husband and I sat in the audience, we were just ugly crying because, you know, like we've waited to have a kid and we wanted this for so long. And we're both just like tears. We're just like, oh my God, we're so proud. But the thing that I think about every time after the fair, so she had this amazing performance, and the whole day Oakley had asked us if she could ride the pony, like the whole day. She was like, can I ride the pony at the fair? And, you know, like they have the little ponies that go in the circle. So she's like, please, please, please. And we're like, all right, after your routine, we'll go find a pony. You can ride the pony. And so she, it's her turn to be put on the pony, and she suddenly does not want to ride the pony. She's terrified of the pony. And she gets on the pony's back and she is just freaking out, crying, to the point where my husband, I have these pictures of Oakley and she is just crying and she has tears just streaming down her face, and my husband's like walking alongside her with the pony. You would have thought that we like forced her to ride the pony. She absolutely terrified, but it's like one of my favorite things. And later on you'd ask her like, hey, like, what do you like? What do you not like? She'd be like, I don't like ponies. And then one of my other ones that I always love to tell people is one time Oakley got stuck going, like climbing up a slide, like she got stuck climbing. And that was a whole moment for her where she was terrified of slides. And so we took her to Chuck E. Cheese. This was like maybe 6 months later after the slide incident where she got stuck trying to climb up it. So we go to Chuck E. Cheese, which she called Cheesy Chucks. And we will always call Chuck E. Cheese Cheesy Chucks for the rest of our life. And Oakley climbs up the little tube thing, and she's like in the little tube at the Chuck. You guys know what I'm talking about, like the little like play place. Okay. Sure. And there's like this little acrylic window, and Oakley realized that the only way down is a slide. And she is pushing her face up against the acrylic window, just crying and just like basically begging for us to come get her. Well, my husband and I'm 5'10", my husband's 6'1". We're big people. We can't climb up that thing. And so we're kind of like, how do we get her down? And we're trying not to laugh at her, but she is just like pushed up against the glass so close, and she's just crying, begging for us to come get her. We go get somebody at Cheesy Chucks, and we're like, hey, like, our daughter's like stuck in the tube. And they're like, this happens a lot. And they're like, we just have to take it apart and we'll get her. And we're like, okay, we're really sorry. And luckily this little girl comes up to us. She's like, I'll get her. And I was like, thank you so much. And so this little girl just like crawls up and has a piece of candy and like lures Oakley with a piece of candy out of the tube. And I think Eric and I were so embarrassed. We were just sitting there like, oh my God. But yeah, when I think about those stories, she was fearless. I'm so proud of her that she tried to ride the pony, and I'm proud of her for dancing, and I'm proud of her for climbing up the tube. But sometimes I'm just like, Oakley, you put yourself in some situations that I'm like, oh.
That is funny. Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing those stories and everything here tonight with us. We really appreciate your time, and your love for Oakley is quite apparent.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really grateful to just continue sharing your story.
Yeah. Anytime you want to come back on, let us know. Is there anything that people should know if they have any information?
If anybody knows anything, please, there's almost $100,000 for you if you can lead us to Oakley's whereabouts. I think sometimes people are afraid to go to the police because maybe they use drugs. We have said it time and time again that we don't care where you're from or what you do. We just want to know where Oakley is, and so that we can lay her to rest or bring her home, whatever that situation may be. And if people are listening and they're like, what can I do to help? We have a template on our Light the Way website with Oakley that you can write Governor Inslee or even the DCYF person in charge, Ross Hunter, and basically just demand that another investigation be done into Oakley's case.